The SOS echoes across the stars. The universe was vast, and the stars stretched out in every direction, each one a mystery, each one a possibility. On a lonely planet, a civilization was on the brink of extinction. The alien race, known as the Kaitar, had faced attack after attack. Their cities were in ruins, and their numbers were dwindling fast, with no way out. Their last hope was a desperate message sent into the cold void of space. It was an SOS, a cry for help sent in every direction, a signal so loud it reached across galaxies, searching for anyone who could answer. The had never imagined that their message would reach the most feared force in the galaxy. They had no idea what they were about to awaken. On Earth, the signal was intercepted. At first, it seemed like just another distress call, the kind they had received countless times before. But this one was different. There was a sense of urgency. In it, a desperation that made even the most experienced officers pause. The message was garbled, almost as if it had been recorded under extreme duress. But the words were clear enough. "We are dying. Please, we need your help." The United Earth Alliance had seen their share of conflict and had made their fair share of enemies, but nothing like this. No one expected the Kaitar to reach out for help, and no one expected them to seek help from Earth. The Kaitar were known for their strange and ancient technology, their ability to survive the harshest environments, and their cold, calculating nature. They had been ruthless in the past, a constant threat in the galaxy, and now they were asking Earth for help. What could have driven them to make such a plea? Inside the United Earth Command, high-ranking officers gathered around the massive communication table. The officers' faces were hard to read, their thoughts hidden behind stoic expressions. The commander, General Corin, stood at the head of the room. His experience in battle was unmatched, but even he could not predict what this mission would lead to. His eyes studied the flashing lights of the SOS signal as it played over the large screen before him. It was disturbing. A cry for help, yes. But there was something in the tone that unsettled him. "This is no ordinary SOS," General Corin said, his voice deep and commanding. "The Kaitar are known for their resilience. They wouldn't ask for help unless they had no other choice." A tense silence fell over the room. The officers exchanged wary glances. They all knew that responding to this call could lead them into an unknown war, one they may not win. But there was one thing they knew for sure: the Kaitar were asking for help. They must be in worse trouble than anyone could imagine. "I say, we send a team to investigate." Another officer spoke up, breaking the silence. "We need to know exactly what's going on before we commit our resources." General Corin turned to him slowly. "And what if this is a trap? The Kaitar have always been manipulative. They could be trying to bait us into a conflict." The room fell silent again. No one spoke. The idea of responding to an alien race known for its cunning and deception was terrifying. But at the same time, Earth couldn't ignore the plea for help. A part of them felt that if they didn't act, they would never forgive themselves. "We have to make a decision," General Corin said, his voice hardening. "We can't sit here forever. The Kaitar SOS is clear, and the time for action is now." A cold shiver ran down everyone's spine as the full weight of the situation set in. The fate of the Kaitar, and possibly the entire galaxy, now rested. On their shoulders, General Corin made his decision. "Prepare the fleet. We are answering the call." The officers jumped into action, scrambling to their stations to begin the preparations. Ships were mobilized, weapons checked, and orders issued. Within hours, the fleet was ready to launch. It wasn't just any fleet. This was the Deathworlder Fleet, the deadliest force Earth had ever assembled. It was made up of the most dangerous warriors, the most powerful ships, and the most advanced weaponry. It had been created for one purpose: to conquer or defend whatever the situation demanded. And now it was being sent on a rescue mission. But no one knew what awaited them. The Deathworlder Fleet, known for its ruthless efficiency and overwhelming power, was now embarking on an unknown mission. Were they walking into a trap, or would they truly be the Qatar's saviors? As the fleet took off, leaving Earth behind, General Corrin stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out into the dark void of space. His mind raced with thoughts of what they might find. The Qatar had always been a threat, but now they were begging for help. What had happened to them? Was the enemy they faced worse than anything they had ever imagined? Set course for the Qatar homeworld, General Corrin ordered. We have no time to waste. Prepare for anything. The fleet sped into the unknown, the stars stretching out before them like an endless sea. It was quiet now, but that quiet was deceiving. Danger could be lurking anywhere, and the Deathworlders knew it. The calm before the storm was always the most dangerous. As the fleet traveled through the dark reaches of space, the general's thoughts lingered on one question. What could have pushed the Qatar to ask for help? And was Earth's answer going to be enough? The next few days would reveal everything. But one thing was certain: the Qatar SOS had been heard, and Earth was coming. The Deathworlder Fleet was on its way, and nothing would stop them from reaching their destination. Preparing the deadly fleet, the stars stretched on, endless and cold, as the Deathworlder Fleet soared through space. Its engines hummed low, a powerful sound that matched the deadly purpose of the ships. In the heart of the flagship, General Corrin stood on the command deck, watching the vast emptiness outside the windows. His face, hard as stone, showed no sign of the doubt that churned inside him. He had led countless missions before, but this was different. This mission was not about conquering or defending, it was about answering an alien SOS, something he had never imagined Earth would ever be involved in. The Qatar had always been enemies, their actions ruthless and cold. Now they were asking for help. What could they possibly want from Earth? Commander, how long until we reach the Qatar's homeworld? General Corrin asked, his voice steady, but filled with a quiet tension. The commander, standing at the control panel, checked the readings and turned back to him. At current speed, we'll arrive in about 12 hours, sir. But we should be prepared for anything. The Qatar may not be as weak as they sound in the message. Corrin nodded slowly, his fingers tightening round the edge of the console. He didn't trust the Qatar, and he didn't trust this mission. There had to be something more behind the SOS's hidden agenda, a trap waiting to be sprung. He wasn't about to let Earth's fleet walk into an ambush. Prepare the fleet for possible battle, Corrin ordered. We may not be walking into a rescue mission. Keep the weapons at the ready and alert all divisions. This could turn ugly very quickly. The officer standing next to him nodded and began relaying the orders. Throughout the fleet, preparations were being made. Soldiers double-checked their gear, the technicians calibrated their weapons, and the officers made sure that the ships were ready for whatever lay ahead. As the flagship moved closer to the Qatar homeworld, the atmosphere on board grew tense. The crew of the Deathworlder Fleet was made up of some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Warriors from many different worlds, each with a reputation for ruthlessness and efficiency. They were known for their brutal efficiency in battle, their ability to survive the most hostile conditions, and yet there was an underlying unease that spread through the ranks. On the bridge, General Corrin studied the view in front of him, his thoughts racing. He had been through countless wars, but this one felt different. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. What if they were walking into a trap? What if this wasn't a simple rescue, but a move to lure Earth's fleet into a war they couldn't win? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden alert. The fleet had crossed into the Qatar-S system. The planet, once hidden among the stars, was now visible in the distance. A faint blue orb surrounded by the cold emptiness of space. It was a beautiful world lush, with forests and oceans, but the general knew better than to be fooled by appearances. The Qatar had been masters of deception in the past, and they could be hiding something more dangerous than they let on. "Commander," Corrin said, his voice low but firm, "scan the planet for any signs of military activity. I want to know everything about their defenses." The commander immediately went to work, his hands moving over the control panel as he ran the scans. The moments stretched into what felt like hours, the tension building as they awaited the results. Finally, the commander looked up, his face pale. "General, there's something strange. There are no signs of any defense systems, nothing on the surface at all, but there's something off. A faint energy signature near the planet's equator. It's irregular." Corrin's heart skipped a beat. There was something there, something the Qatar didn't want them to see. "Take us closer," Corrin ordered. "Prepare for landing. We need to see this with our own eyes." As the fleet moved into orbit around the planet, the mysterious energy signature grew stronger. The general's gut told him that they were about to uncover something far darker than they had expected. But what, and why had the Qatar failed to mention this in their SOS? The ships began to land, the massive warships descending through the atmosphere with deadly precision. The ground below was lush and green, peaceful looking, but Corrin knew better. He had seen enough of the galaxy to recognize when something was wrong. The planet was hiding something a secret that the Qatar didn't want the Deathworlders to uncover. "Prepare for ground assault," Corrin said, his voice low and commanding. "We move out in 5 minutes. Everyone stay alert. We don't know what we'll find down there." As the soldiers boarded their transports, the tension was almost unbearable. They could all feel it, the sense of dread that hung in the air. The Qatar had called for help, but what if this wasn't a rescue? What if Earth's fleet was walking into a deadly trap? As the transports took off and descended toward the surface, General Corrin looked out at the alien world. The Qatar had reached out to Earth, but now the question remained. Was this the beginning of a new alliance, or was Earth about to face its most dangerous enemy yet? The answer lay ahead, waiting to be discovered on the mysterious surface of the Qatar's homeworld. The first contactor Deathworlder Fleet touched down on the Qatar homeworld, the massive warships landing softly on the planet's lush terrain. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the soldiers readied themselves for the unknown. The air smelled different, rich with the scent of alien flora, but there was something unsettling about it. The ground beneath their boots felt solid, but a strange unease lingered in the back of their minds. General Corrin stood at the front of the fleet's command transport, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The landscape was beautiful, peaceful even, with tall trees and vibrant green grass stretching out to the horizon. But beauty could be deceiving. He had learned long ago that the most peaceful worlds often hid the darkest secrets. The fleet's landing zone was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual chaos of preparing for battle. There was no sound of the usual alien wildlife or the hum of Qatar machinery, just silence. And it unnerved Corin more than he cared to admit. He glanced over at his trusted lieutenant, Captain Arik, who stood beside him. Arik's face was just as unreadable as Corin's own, but the general could tell he was feeling the same weight of the unknown. The two had fought together in countless battles, and neither of them had ever faced something quite like this. Something's off, Arik muttered, his voice barely a whisper. Corin nodded, his eyes narrowing as he took in the peaceful landscape. I don't like it either. Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into. With a simple nod from Corin, the troops began to disembark from the transports. The soldiers, armed and alert, moved out in tight formation. They fanned out in groups, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. The ground was covered in thick foliage, and the trees above created a canopy of shadows, making it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. Corin led the way, his boots crunching the earth beneath him as he moved forward, his sharp eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. He could feel the eyes of his soldiers on him, waiting for his orders. But he didn't have answers to give them, not yet. They were all walking into the unknown. The sound of their footsteps was the only noise in the otherwise silent world. The soldiers moved cautiously, alert to every sound. Suddenly, something moved in the shadows, quick and silent, too quick to be seen. Corin's heart skipped a beat as his hand instinctively went to the weapon at his side. Hold position, he commanded sharply. The soldiers froze, their weapons raised, their eyes darting around, looking for the source of the movement. For a long moment, nothing happened. No more movement, no more sounds. The eerie silence returned. But Corin's gut told him that something was watching them, something waiting for them to make the first move. Then, from the dense trees, a figure stepped into view, Qatar. But this was unlike any Qatar the Deathworlders had encountered before. The alien stood tall, with glowing markings on its skin and strange armor that shimmered like the surface of a distant star. Its eyes, though, were the most unsettling. They were dark, like two black voids, with no trace of emotion or life. The figure didn't speak. It just stood there, its gaze fixed on Corin. The soldiers tensed, their fingers itching on the triggers of their weapons. But Corin held up a hand, signaling them to stand down. Who are you? Corin asked, his voice steady, but his mind racing. This wasn't what he had expected. The Qatar had asked for help, but now they were facing something far more mysterious. The Qatar figure finally spoke, its voice cold and hollow. You should not have come. The words sent a chill down Corin's spine. He stepped forward, ignoring the uneasy feeling in his gut. We came to help. We answered your SOS. What's happening here? The Qatar didn't answer immediately. Instead, it looked past Corin, staring into the distance, as if contemplating something. Then it spoke again, its voice softer this time. The SOS was a lie. A call for help, to lure you here. Now you are trapped. Corin's heart pounded in his chest. His worst fears were starting to take shape. Trap? What do you mean? You called us. You need our help. The Qatar's eyes flickered with something a glimmer of emotion, but it was quickly gone. We do not need your help, it said, its voice growing colder. You are the ones who have been deceived. The true enemy is already here. Corin felt a sense of dread wash over him. He could see the fear in the eyes of his soldiers, and he knew they could sense it too. The Qatar had made their move, and they weren't as helpless as they had appeared. The general's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who had sent the SOS? Who had betrayed them? Before Corin could speak again, a loud explosion echoed in the distance, followed by the sound of gunfire. The ground trembled beneath them as the sound of battle reached their ears. The soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons and took up defensive positions. "We are not the ones in danger," the Kaitar whispered, its voice now barely audible. "You are." And then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the jungle, leaving Corin and his team in stunned silence. The truth was out there. But Corin knew one thing for certain now. They weren't alone on this planet, and the real enemy had just revealed itself. The battle had begun. A battle like no other. The jungle was alive with the sounds of battle. The ground shook as explosions echoed through the trees, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning fuel. Corin's heart raced as he motioned for his soldiers to move quickly into position. The Kaitar had been clear they were not the helpless race they appeared to be, and now the true enemy had shown itself. "Move out," Corin barked, his voice steady despite the growing chaos around him. "Get to the front lines. We need to find out what we're up against." His soldiers moved swiftly, their training kicking in as they navigated the dense jungle. They were used to hostile environments, but this was different. Every step felt like they were being watched. The Kaitar had lured them here, and now the jungle felt like it was closing in on them. Corin's mind raced as they pushed forward. The Kaitar's warning echoed in his ears. "You are the ones who have been deceived. Who could have set them up like this? Was it the Kaitar, or was there something else, something more dangerous, lurking in the shadows?" As they reached the clearing, Corin's eyes narrowed. The landscape before him was completely different from the peaceful world they had landed on. The ground was scarred, the trees ripped apart, and in the distance, the unmistakable sound of weapons firing filled the air. "They're here," one of Corin's lieutenants said, his voice tense. "They're not alone." Corin turned to look at the enemy forces. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. The creatures that were emerging from the shadows weren't Kaitar. They were taller, their skin a deep, unnatural shade of black. Their eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and they moved with an inhuman grace. They were unlike anything Corin had ever seen before. They were monsters, pure and simple, fire. Corin shouted, the command sharp and urgent. The Deathworlder Fleet soldiers opened fire, their weapons unloading a barrage of bullets and energy blasts into the advancing creatures. But the enemy moved too quickly. They were faster than anything Corin had encountered, darting between trees and vanishing into the shadows before the soldiers could aim properly. "Damn it, they're too fast," Corin growled, his eyes tracking the creature's movements as best as he could. Form a perimeter. But the creatures didn't attack head-on. Instead, they circled around, moving in waves, their glowing eyes watching, waiting. It was a terrifying strategy. Let the soldiers wear themselves out, confuse them, and then strike when they were weakest. A sudden scream cut through the air, followed by the sound of someone collapsing to the ground. Corin spun around, his eyes searching for the source of the noise. One of his soldiers lay motionless on the ground, a gaping wound in his side, blood pooling around him. "Fall back," Corin shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "We need to regroup." The soldiers began to pull back, but the creatures were closing in. Every move they made was deliberate, every step calculated. It was as if they were toying with the humans. Corin's pulse raced as he realized they were trapped. They had underestimated their enemies, and now they were paying the price. The creatures moved with speed and precision, and they showed no mercy, just as Corin thought things couldn't get worse. Another explosion rocked the ground, and a new force emerged from the shadows. This time, it was a Shipan alien warship, unlike anything Corin had ever seen. It hovered silently above the ground, its dark hull reflecting the light of the explosions below. From the ship, more creatures descended, their dark figures landing silently in the midst of the battle. They were stronger, faster, and more terrifying than anything Corin's fleet had ever faced. These were not just soldiers, they were hunters. Corin watched as the creatures tore through his soldiers with ease, their movements too quick for the human soldiers to track. Every blow landed with deadly precision. The battlefield had turned into a slaughterhouse, and there seemed to be no way out. But just as the creatures closed in on Corin's position, a loud roar erupted from the jungle. It was a deafening sound, one that shook the very ground beneath their feet. For a moment, everything stopped. Even the creatures froze, their glowing eyes scanning the darkness for the source of the sound. Then, from the trees, another figure emerged, massive creature, towering over the battlefield, its muscles rippling beneath its dark skin. It was a Deathworlder, but not like the others. This one was different. It was larger, stronger, and its eyes burned with a primal rage. The creature roared again, charging into the fray, swinging a massive weapon in each hand. The other creatures hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But it didn't take long before the battle was joined once more. The Deathworlder charged into the enemies, tearing through them with brutal force. Corin didn't wait. He saw the opportunity and seized it, fall back to the extraction point. He shouted, waving his soldiers toward the clearing. Now, the soldiers, shaken but determined, rallied together and began to retreat. But as they made their way through the jungle, Corin's thoughts were elsewhere. The battle wasn't over. They had survived this fight, but the creatures, whatever they were still out there, and the Deathworlder Fleet had only scratched the surface of the war that awaited them. What the hell are these things? Corin muttered, his mind racing. We'll find out soon enough, General, Awoke said, his voice grim. But right now, we need to survive. The retreat continued, but the feeling of dread remained. The Deathworlders had answered the SOS, but what they had uncovered was a nightmare far worse than they had ever imagined. Humanity's wrath, the jungle, once a place of quiet beauty, had now become a battlefield scorched, torn, and filled with the remnants of the fiercest clash the Deathworlder Fleet had ever faced. The creatures, those terrifying enemies, had made their presence known in the cruelest of ways, slaughtering Earth's finest warriors with terrifying ease. Corin's heart was still pounding from the chaos they had just endured, but there was no time for rest. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the survivors retreated to the extraction point, their minds weighed heavily on what had just unfolded. The sheer speed and savagery of the enemy left a bitter taste in their mouths. There was no question now. This wasn't just a simple rescue mission. It had turned into something far worse, something that threatened to consume them all. Corin's hands clenched into fists as he gazed at the retreating forms of his soldiers. The ground beneath them was littered with the bodies of the fallen, both human and alien. Every step felt like a heavy reminder of what they had just faced. The creatures were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Their speed, their power, and the way they moved coordinated, as if they were all connected with a single, terrifying purpose: He had seen death before. He had seen entire planets fall to the might of his fleet. But this was different. The enemy they had just faced wasn't just a threat. It was a nightmare that moved in shadows. The extraction point loomed ahead, but Corrin knew the real fight was just beginning. As the last of his soldiers reached the landing zone, the sound of engines roaring to life filled the air. The transport ships began to lift off, rising above the jungle, carrying the survivors to safety. But even as they ascended, Corrin's thoughts remained focused on the ground below. What do we do now? Arik asked, his voice low but urgent. The man's face was bruised, blood streaking down his cheek, but his eyes were still sharp, still burning with the determination that Corrin had come to respect over the years. Corrin didn't answer immediately. His mind raced. He had seen the way the creatures operated, the way they hunted and attacked. But the real question was, why? Why had they attacked them? What was their goal? And why had the Qatar lured them here, only to betray them? We need to regroup, Corrin finally said, his voice grim. We need to figure out what we're really up against. This wasn't a simple attack. We've been played. The transport ships soared higher, away from the burning wreckage below. But Corrin's mind didn't let go of the fight. It couldn't. His soldiers were counting on him. Earth was counting on him. The creatures they had faced were just the beginning and the worst part. They weren't the only threat on this planet. The Qatar, the race that had called for help, had played their part in this betrayal. But Corrin had a nagging feeling deep in his gut the real war was still ahead. Of them, and he had no idea who or what they were about to face. As the fleet ascended to the safety of the atmosphere, Corrin turned to Arik once more. We need to find the Qatar who sent that SOS. They know something we don't. The question of why. The Qatar had lied hung heavy in the air. They had called for help, but had their true intentions been something more sinister? Had they been using Earth's forces as pawns in a game they couldn't yet understand? Arik nodded, his face set with determination. We'll find them, General. We'll get to the bottom of this. As the fleet left the Qatar homeworld behind, Corrin looked out at the stars ahead. They had entered a galaxy full of chaos and danger. But now, they were up against something far more dangerous than anything they had ever faced before. Whatever. This war was whatever lay ahead. Corrin knew one thing for sure. Earth would not be the one to back down, and if the Qatar wanted to play a game of survival, they had just learned that Earth's Deathworlder Fleet didn't lose.